Everyone. Thank you so much again for joining us for today's Day of Action. My name is Miranda. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I'm the Women's Program Officer here at the New Haven Pride Center. Before we begin today's program, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are hosting this event. The New Haven Pride Center was founded and operates on the traditional lands of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Scottycook, Golden Hill Palgasset, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac peoples. We hope that from wherever you are, you take a moment to acknowledge and honor the Native people whose lands you occupy and the history of the place you're in. Find out more about Native lands at native-land.ca. Now, I'm so excited to welcome you to today's program. This Day of Action is hosted in honor of International Women's Day. We're excited to host our panel, Queer Women Create, right now, followed by Queer Women Organize at 2 p.m., a coffee hour with me at 3:30 p.m., and our night of action with Planned Parenthood Votes Connecticut at 6 p.m. Finally, before we begin, we'd like to thank our sponsors who made today's program possible. Thank you, CT Humanities and Planned Parenthood Votes Connecticut, for all of your support. Your support helps to facilitate important events like this one. If you'd like to know more about sponsoring programs like these, please feel free to reach out. I'd also like to take a moment to thank Nick Dion for coordinating our ASL interpreting and all of the amazing interpreters that we work with to make our programming more broadly accessible. Now, I have the honor of introducing Luciana McClure of Nasty Women Connecticut, our moderator for this event. Luciana is an independent contemporary art curator, activist, educator, and practicing artist. She's also the founder of Nasty Women Movement in Connecticut and leads Nasty Women Connecticut. She is an immigrant from Brazil and currently resides in Connecticut, where she is pursuing a Master of Arts in Women and Gender Studies at Southern Connecticut State University, where she also works as a graduate teaching assistant. Luciana is a board member of Art Space New Haven, a member of the College Art Association, the Connecticut Regional Coordinator at the Feminist Art Project, and most recently, a board member here at the New Haven Pride Center. Thank you so much, Luciana, for joining us today and for moderating this really awesome panel of amazing women.
Thank you, Miranda, so much for this wonderful introduction. Oh, where did you go? So thank you, everybody. I am happy to be here tonight, this morning, with some incredible women. I would like to introduce Hope Chávez, who's here with us today. Her pronouns are she, her. Also with Siobhan Ekeh. Her pronouns also she, hers, and also Tia Lynn Waters. Oh. So maybe we're going to start a little bit by everybody introducing themselves. Maybe we'll start with Hope. Hope, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Hi, folks. My name is Hope Chávez. I am the artistic producer at Longmore Theater here in New Haven. But I also, as we have a conversation today about being creators and women who create, I also have a facilitation practice and a consulting practice. I consider myself a creator in the sense that I do have an artistic mind, and I work deeply with artists to ensure that the vision that they have in their head is able to be manifested in the reality. I do that first and foremost through theater, but I've also done that with music and with other visual arts as well. So I'm excited to be in this space and in this conversation.
Thank you, Hope. Siobhan?
Hi, it's good to be here. I'm Siobhan Ekeh. I'm a 17-year-old Nigerian-American art student. Most of my art focuses on Black and queer identity. I'm a student at the Educational Center for the Arts in New Haven, and I'm a member of Connecticut Against Brutality. So I'm very passionate about connecting, people in the arts with the struggle for racial justice and justice for queer people and for women. So happy International Women's Day, and it's great to be on this panel with a bunch of great, awesome women.
Thank you, Siobhan. And last but not least, Tia.
I'm actually not Tia. I'm Versatile Poetiq. It's okay, but shout out to whoever.
Oh, I did. Sorry.
Don't worry about it. It's okay.
Thank you for correcting my.
You're welcome. It's okay. My real name is Brittany, though, by the way, if everyone wanted to know. But most people know me as Versatile Poetiq. I'm a spoken word artist. I'm a host, and I'm an educator. So I teach spoken word for a living, and I'm just a voice. So I'm just really happy to be here. And sorry, my pronouns aren't up here. I go by she and her pronouns. Pronouns for anyone needs to know.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, sorry about that. I was reading the other thing. But anyhow, so since we're all here talking about queer women create, we're going to keep this very fluid and very organic. I want this to be like an actual conversation between us, sharing in their experiences, but also, what is it like, how does queerness, take place into your creative practice, into your work, what is that like? And how is it that you implement that as part of your advocacy? So anyone that just want to jump in. Don't all fight yourselves, please. And I guess the reason I'm asking this is really important is because I will say in my past, it took me a while to actually put the word queer into my work but also in my introduction. And I think that comes with everyone's experience and bringing, but also how we come into terms of our own identity. And we talk about it and then we say, you know what? I'm ready, to bring this part of myself forth and really be vocal through my work, because I think that's it's really important when it comes to, the advocacy, but also in the creative space, particularly.
Well, I identify as a masculine lesbian. So it's important. I have a poem called Me. I've been performing this poem for 10 years. It's carried me to places I never thought I would go. And in that poem, I'm describing what it's like to be me. And then the poem also turns very universal at the end. You are judged by your appearance. I can't change my skin color. That's number one. And my clothes, I guess, are masculine clothes. So if I walk in a room, most people think I'm a boy. Anyway, and I'm judged. And when I go up there to do my poem, it's like, well, who's this boy? At first. And I think it's just very important to, as an artist, as a spoken word artist and an educator, to be a voice for the voiceless and take action for the actionless. So that's why I feel it's important, because there's probably many young people, and I'd say still adults, who struggle with identity. They struggle with it. So art is healing. So hopefully I can help heal and be a voice for those who don't have the courage to be that just yet.
Now, that's super important. I think especially when we consider representation, and who are we seeing in our community, who are we can identify. And I think that's a very important thing, especially as we talk more and more about the construct around gender, and how that hurts us, especially growing up. This idea that we must stick to this binary, and anything outside of the binary, it's like, well, how do I navigate this? I haven't been taught to kind of navigate those spaces yet. So thank you. If anybody, maybe Hope or Siobhan, want to kind of respond to that in your own experience?
Yeah, I can definitely relate to what Versatile said, because that is so important to sort of be the representation that you didn't see when you're growing up. Kind of, and I sort of think of it as if you're taking a journey where you don't necessarily know which way you're going, you can be the person that's drawing the map as you're walking, so that when you get to the end of that journey, you can pass that on to somebody else, especially being Black and queer and a woman, it's a lot of things stacked on top of each other. It's all different things that you have to learn to navigate at the same time. And it can get super complicated thinking about how Black people are kind of hyper visible in the media. You see us everywhere, often for the wrong reasons, often because of cultural appropriation or because of, violence against us or whatever it is. Whereas queer people are very, suffer from a lack of visibility, where you barely ever see us. So if you're growing up as a queer kid, you might never really see a queer person in your life or in the media or in the arts or whatever. So it's you have these two different things. It's how do you kind of show kids who are coming up after you how to navigate through that? And I feel with art, you can really help people to understand that living in your own identity doesn't have to that you're sacrificing one part of you to be something else. I don't have to sacrifice being Black in order to be queer, or vice versa. So it's like exciting to be able to show people that through your art and to be able to show them like, this is who I am. Now you can go be who you are.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and I would just say that like in the theater community, there is a lot of cis male gayness. That is a very dominant. In fact, I would say cis gay men, cis white gay men have led the theater industry for a really long time. And it wasn't, I would say that trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming representation is atrocious in this community.
Mm-hmm.
It is not being represented, nor is there, it's funny, like, you know, we do anti-racism work in the theater community a lot, specifically at Long Wharf. And it's interesting how there's a little bit more comfort around that than there is around gender work, around like, what does it mean to create spaces that are trans inclusive? What does it mean to create spaces that are really disrupting whatever we've understood the norms to be around gender identity? I didn't know a lot of queer women in theater until like the middle of where I am in my career right now. And being someone who identifies as bisexual, I don't know a lot of other like bi or pan folks in the theater community. Right. So like, it's interesting just to see like, as we're talking about representation, what I've known and what has felt familiar and what has not felt familiar. And it's, you know, it's really complex to think like, because theater thinks of itself as like a really queer friendly place, and it is, and it isn't. Like, it's queer friendly again for like the norm, which is the white cis gay man. It's a very comfortable space for those folks. It is not always a safe space for women, trans folks, and anyone who's not sitting in the gay or lesbian binary.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. It's like the whole thing about representation and thinking about we're all inhabiting these different creative spaces, you know, and then there is also like, you know, being like queer women. It's like, oh, so how, you know, what is our responsibility in a sense, you know, but at the same time, not in a way that we're feeling like so burned out as well. You know, so there is kind of like that line between like, how do you do your work and you're still caring for yourself, you know, and understanding like, how do you navigate those spaces? Because you're right. You know, sometimes we're looking for other folks there can, you know, that you're saying, you know, I see this one queer woman, I look up to her, and she kind of has paved the way to teach me how I navigate right now. And then there's also these generations. You know, you have youth folks, you know, you have, you know, people that are out of college, you have like elderly, like, so there is a number of generations. And I think that's, you know, and again, I think if we think about this month, all about like, you know, Women's International Month, you know, how do we talk about that in relationship to queerness? You know, the history of feminism and feminist practice in the arts and queerness. You know, have we seen enough of that in the past? And we know the answer is no, you know, but so what is it that we can do now? And what is it that you've been doing to make sure that, you know, that queerness is happening, you know, in your space? And I think all of you have tapped a little bit into it, but especially when you're considering also racial justice as part of that, because I do think that, you know, queerness, you know, and gender equity, it does work together in racial justice, you know, so it's like, how do we make sure that those things are always working together? Siobhan, you want to talk through your youth and activist work also?
Yeah, sure. I would love to. Yeah, I think that that's super important what you said, like to make sure that Women's History Month becomes intersectional. Especially, I think it's kind of funny to think about how it comes right after Black History Month. It's super interesting to see how a lot of white women are very quick to pivot. Like, you know, on the 28th, it's like midnight strikes. It's like, oh, it's Women's History Month. We can stop talking about Black people now. But it's like, well, no, you can't. So I feel like it's super important as like intersectional feminists to make sure that whenever you see like, you know, a white cisgendered straight woman being lifted up for, you know, whatever historical thing she might have done, you can also offer, you know, another woman who, you know, is belonging to another community like the Black community or the trans community who's also done, you know, similar work or who has been overlooked or whatever it is, and to kind of show people, you know, important work is being done by people of all colors and people of all different genders and people of all different gender expressions especially. And I think that one thing that's been super important to me is to like keep Women's History Month very contemporary and like show people it doesn't just have to be, history doesn't just have to mean 100 years ago somebody did this. History can also mean like today we're sitting here together, talking about our lives and talking about our connections to being women and about feminism. And like that can be women's history. Like people act like it's so hard to find Black women and queer women to celebrate, but no, they're all around you and they're alive and they're, working right now. So you have to support, Black women artists that Black trans women artists that and it's not that hard to find them because they exist in every single community. So instead of acting like it's such a struggle to find them, you just need to do the work to like seek them out and then like financially support them, support their art, share their art, and like support them in whatever way you can. And if you're not doing that, I feel like your due diligence as a feminist isn't really being done, because you have to be actually supporting living women and living people who are working right now and trying to make it.
Now that's so important. Absolutely. Hope, I saw you're going to jump in.
Well, I was thinking about your question, like how do we keep it intersectional in the conversation? And I don't know if I have a great answer to like the how, but I will just share that it is like one of my biggest like missions in life is to, when I start to hear like the silo in the conversation, to like try to make space and interrupt that a little, to be like, I know that it's hard to complicate this, but I'm going to complicate this for you by adding in another layer, whether it's like in this case talking about queerness and or gender on top of anti-racism work. But I've heard folks say, like I recognize like the complexity of having to focus in on one issue, maybe as an individual, like your organizing work needs to be focused, right? So you are choosing to focus in on one thing. But I believe that if you do that at the expense of all of the layers and the nuances of humanity and the messiness of humanity, I think you will inevitably cause harm. Like, I just think that you will. And if you are not willing to do the labor of like getting into that gray and getting messy with that, then I question, like, what are you really after as an organizer then? Are you after some kind of like clout for being the best at this one thing? Like, what is it that you're really after if it's not to serve people, and people are messy?
No, totally. And I guess that's always the challenge, but it's part of the work. You need to get in that messy place because it's also addressing the past, and trying to repair in the present, so hopefully in the future there's less, there's a little less work to do, not because the work will always be there for you. Versatile, want to talk about your...
Well, that's a loaded, layered question. How to?
Right.
Well, I think seek out spaces. And, as the other two beautiful panelists were saying, it's out there. It's right in front of you. You can't really avoid it, especially, unless you're just not on social media and not looking at the TV, not reading the news, then I guess you're in the dark. What we have dealt with in the past 4 years, we know this madness was always there. The veil is now off. So now a lot of people are very uncomfortable. You get what I'm saying? And sometimes you have to, in my opinion, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And we all do have these biases, okay? Especially even in our own communities, no matter what they are, what you identify as. We have these biases. We have a little bit of ignorance, little things that we don't know. Just be willing to learn. As an educator, I always tell young people, especially, and I'll tell adults, try to learn something new every day. Okay. Me, I just feel like it's my duty to be who I am, to be the spoken word artist, to be a voice. This offends people. Okay. Like, there's a lot of people who like this on my hat, but there's people out there who are very triggered by what this means. You get what I'm saying? So, and I know that, and that's okay. I'm still going to represent what I believe in, and just help people, educate them, because sometimes maybe they just don't understand. That's just my opinion. So I do, like, if there's a protest going on and I'm available to go, I'm going. There's a play, Hope, you want me to be in, I'm going. New Haven Pride Center, they want me to be a part of something like this, I'll be there. Just be there. Do the best that you can. That's in simple terms I guess I can give you.
Yeah, I love that because it's like showing up. It's like what are the ways that we're showing up in our communities and in and the communities that we know that this work is also important. So through that we are reinforcing the intersect of issues, because while some of our fights might be very different, from other organizations, like we still know is like, well, what is it like to show up, and what is it like doing this messy work, and I'm sure we all have like these stories of like, oh, that was a very uncomfortable moment, where I had to be in this gray area. I think I caused a little harm, and it's time for me to figure out how does that repair look like, and I think the humbleness, I think, is a huge part of it, saying like, what, I need to learn. I don't have all the answers, but I am here to try to be better and work with my community and with other folks doing this work as well. And as you said, we're so like to educate, in education, I think it's a huge part. And let's talk a little bit about that. Like, so what does education look like in your work, especially like, for example, like, Hope, when you're thinking about, the production of pieces, how does that education come into place? Is it through the plays? Is it through a shift of narrative? Is it by implementing a story that hasn't been told, and as we go into, representation, how is that we're shifting some of those narratives in order to make those, to all of a sudden make those narratives what they should be like, to be inclusive and to make sure that people are all recognized, or those folks that haven't been recognized. That's a better way of putting it.
It's a really multifaceted thing, but I think this is a big way that I define myself as a producer. Like, I don't necessarily think of myself as like, my producing job starts and ends with like budgets and contracts. Like, no, absolutely not. For me, producing is about the process. Producing, I am like, I want to see holistic care happen for the artist, for the audience, and for the staff of, if I'm working at an institution, like in this case at Long Wharf. I think a good example of this is when we did I Am My Own Wife last year, which was our last production before COVID. Actually, it was right about this time that we were starting rehearsals on the next show and closing it. But I Am My Own Wife was a story of a trans woman who lived in Germany in World War II and sort of somehow miraculously was able to survive the Nazi and Stasi regimes. And we had never, I don't know if Long Wharf had ever had a trans character in a story before. I think it's highly unlikely, but even if they had, it had been so long. And there was certainly not a familiarity of working with an almost entirely trans design team and performer and creative team on the project. And so it was, I took it as my responsibility from the get-go. We do have a lot of queer folks who work at the theater, but again, we only have one person on staff who identifies as non-binary. And so I was like, we gotta take care of some staff education, and we've got to ensure that when these folks are here, that they are cared for, and that when we get to the part of an audience seeing this, Long Wharf does talkbacks after every single performance. And I was like, we are opening the artists who are going to be part of those talkbacks also to like a whole myriad of questions that could come about no longer the plot of the play, but rather this person's identity or the actor's identity who's playing the trans woman, right? And so we, something that we believe strongly in is bringing in like cultural competency consultants when like we do not have the expertise or the lived experience. So we paid trans women to come in and serve for the entirety of the production. One woman in particular, she sort of served as like a liaison. So she was able to also hold confidentiality with folks and sort of support them if they had anything, so that their identity was not something they had to like negotiate, defend, or explain at any point in time. They could be the artist who was working on lighting, right? Or working on costumes. They could just focus on doing their job. And then on top of that, she did training for the staff for like how to facilitate these talkback conversations, how to field certain kinds of questions. And it's stuck with us forever, right? Like we use this show as an opportunity to say, okay, yes, there's an education component for the audience, for us, the staff, and now how do we make sure that that's permanently embedded in the structure of how we move through other shows? Because it doesn't have to be a trans show for us to be hiring trans designers, right? Or trans performers. And so how will we remember and carry these practices with us? And it really helped to give people like language and how to how to mitigate microaggressions, how to answer certain kinds of like just stuff. Like we want to bring the audience on the journey with us. We don't want to like, you know, point the finger and shoot them out, but we also have to be really careful about the boundaries that we protect. So that's like one example, I think.
No, that's a really powerful example. I don't know if Siobhan or Verstal also want to jump in on that. And like, as we're thinking about education, because I'm sure the education that can be very different. And, sometimes it happens in the local level in your community. It happens, in a group of friends, it happens in a new project, in anything that you're like putting it out there as a creative, queer woman.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate to that. And I think what Hope was saying about like having, paying people to actually do the education that you need is like super important. And I wish that we saw more of that, because if you can do that in a theater company, why can't we do that at school? You would think that would be the most important thing, is like, let's have all our teachers go through racial sensitivity training, gender sensitivity training, all these different things. And yet they don't. And I think the situation for students would be so much more comfortable if they did, because Black students and queer students and trans students especially are constantly being put into a position like in an educational setting where they are the ones that have to be the teachers. And I think that that's just absolutely like, it kind of disgusts me, and it like almost scares me a little bit, like the amount of times that I've been asked to be the teacher of my class without being paid. And I understand teacher salaries are already so low, but I'm like, well, are you going to pay me to teach your class now about Black history, or to give you a list of Black artists that you can talk about during Black History Month, or to give you a list of Black trans artists that you can talk about during Women's History Month, or whatever it is? I like to be the student that has to constantly start the conversation, and then to have the responsibility of like completing the conversation by actually doing the education is really frustrating, because that's a lot of like emotional, intellectual labor that you then have to do for free. So I think that that's something that people should keep in mind when they are thinking about how to educate themselves and how to educate other people. The fact that you can't just ask queer women and people of color to like be your teacher all the time for no money. You can't just be, even if your intention is to educate yourself and to become better, you can't just be asking that of other people, because you're already a mistake. You're in the mistake of asking them to expend their labor for you for free, which, especially as a Black woman, I find that incredibly problematic when white people ask me to do that, but yeah, it was especially exciting over the summer when there were so many protests and stuff going on, to be able to see people kind of coming together communally to educate each other, whether it was over the internet or like in person at protests and stuff, and for people to come together to kind of hear what other people had to say. Because I would say that like it can be a big problem when you go out of your way to ask Black people or Black women or Black trans women to educate you about their experience. But if they're freely offering up that information, if they're freely offering up that platform, it's important, like Versatile said, to show up, to be the person that is actually there to listen when they're willing to give up that information and to share their experience. And I think we saw that a lot this summer, and we saw a lot of artists come together to kind of share their stories and be able to educate people through their art and what they do. So yeah, I thought that was pretty special.
Yeah, and that too, I definitely agree with you when it comes to like the education is like, how, the queer person in the, in the classroom, or the Black student in the classroom, it becomes kind of like the token student to be like, well, you're the one that you're going to talk to us about it. Can you teach us? And it's like, and that's what it shows an issue with the institution, and issues that, it's not one anti-bias and anti-racist Sunday training is going to fix that structural racism that exists within institutions, because, what people shouldn't be having to do this kind of labor, you shouldn't have to be doing as a student, this labor in the middle of your classroom. It's like, it shows, a slice of the problem, and how what are we doing with education? How education is actually doing the work it's supposed to do, and how it isn't, because it's leaving big conversations out. It's leaving, racism, gender equity, activism, social justice. What do those things look like, through an intersectional lens, in a way that we can apply to our communities, in a way that we feel that, that we are working towards something together. And I would love to see that someday. And you're right. We do see that in our community through the, community organizing work, through the folks that are leading these conversations, are having protests, are creating moments where we come together and we say, like, you know what? This change actually might be possible because of these folks that are doing this work, because it's what they love to do. But you're right. It shouldn't be at the expense of their emotional well-being, for sure. Versatile.
Yeah, I remember speaking at my first protest. I was so nervous. Someone asked me to speak. I was like, oh boy. And the main thing I was saying, white people, listen, pick up a book, do some research. We're tired of having to tell you, you know what I'm saying, about what you should know or you can figure out yourself, and I guess should be getting paid for it. I never really thought about that. I'm just thinking about the information being let out there. I think it is very important. It should be implemented in the educational system. Some sort of racial diversity classes with queerness, so people can have a better understanding of each other, of themselves, and how to navigate with other people. It's extremely important. This goes down to the fact where they say, there's a study, they say a lot of Black students actually will do better with teachers who look like them. Okay, no disrespect to any white teachers, but I didn't have a Black teacher since until I got to college. My entire life. Yeah, can you imagine that? I grew up in Avon, Connecticut. So yeah, at one point, and Simsbury and Avon, Connecticut. In Simsbury, I was the only Black kid in the entire school in the 3rd grade after I moved. Yeah, so I've lived a life like you wouldn't believe. But it has made me a very versatile person to be able to adapt to people. I can fit in any space because of it. So I do appreciate it, but I do wish I was raised with more diversity, if that makes sense. I don't understand what the issue is with diversity. To me, it's cool to see people from different cultures together in a space. This also relates to the police. They are policing neighborhoods they're not from people. That's half the problem. You causing havoc, but then you get to go leave that neighborhood that you police. You see, you don't understand. You didn't grow up in the neighborhood. So you don't understand how to navigate or, mingle with the people in the neighborhood. You are afraid of the neighborhood that you are policing. That's similar to the teachers. A lot of them are teaching in neighborhoods they don't even live or from. So this is really, when you think, this is really deep. Again, we need this put into the educational system, and we need spaces. And again, shout out to the New Haven Pride Center for creating this space. We might have to do this every week, okay? And it's also therapeutic, for me at least, to have these discussions, and it gets you thinking. Just think, people, look in that mirror. We point one finger, but there's 3 pointing back at you. Don't forget. Just my opinion.
No, Versa, that's you. I'm like processing what you said, and I'm like, you're totally right. It's like there was this criminalization of communities, and a criminalization of also based on gender, then based on race. And you're right. It's like how many targets are on your back, for existing and for doing your work, and the responsibility of all these spaces. You're right, the education system. And I personally, I always call for the dismantling of the education system because I think, it needs to start young. It needs to start kindergarten. Let's talk about race. Let's talk about gender. Let's talk about these constructs. Let's talk about actually preparing people for being in a world that it is this world that is diverse. It is a diverse world. So you can't just shield away, and, because that just creates more harm. And we don't have enough conversations, and we should. You're right. Every week. I'm going to make sure I don't miss any questions. What is the ask that we have? Okay, so we have we have a question right here. I think this is a question from Zulinat. What is the ask that we have for community, organizations, etc., when it comes to supporting queer women creators, meaning financially, project-wise, regarding mental health, etc.? Anybody want to jump in and tackle that? That's a great question. Of course, Zulina. Shout out to Zulina.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I can try to jump in on that a little bit
Yes,
because
please. Yeah.
being involved in community organizing, I think that that's a question that people don't ask enough because people seem to think that it's enough to just bring queer women on board, when that's really just the beginning of it. And like, I think it very much connects to what Hope was saying about to bring people into your spaces. You have to make sure that they're going to be safe. You have to make sure that they're going to be comfortable, and you have to make sure that they're not going to have to constantly be explaining themselves. And the amount of situations that I personally have been put in where it's like, okay, we're going to bring you in here as, you know, our Black queer woman, and you're going to do your Black queer woman thing, but we're not going to like support you in any kind of way, like you said in the question, financially or, you know, mental health wise or whatever. It's like, it feels like exploitation rather than representation or inclusion. It just feels like you're kind of using somebody to get your point across, or using somebody to make you look better, when what you really should be doing is taking care of the needs of that person first and foremost. So I think that when you involve queer women in your organizing, which you definitely need to do, first you need to make sure that the space that you're going to be bringing them into is actually safe for them to be in, and you need to make sure that, you know, you are creating an environment where they will be seen and where they'll be heard, especially when it comes to organizing or, you know, whatever it is, because there's so many dangerous situations, especially for, you know, trans women or for non-binary people. There's so many situations that can be dangerous for them that if you haven't done your research and if you haven't informed the people around you about what they need, then you could be actually putting them in more danger than they were in to begin with. So I think that when people think about including queer women in their organizing and in their advocacy, they need to realize that including them and just having them there is only the first step. And after that, there comes a lot of other like things that you need to do to make sure that your space is safe.
Yeah, and like you're right, it's like how do we actually, thinking about care, care as praxis within like organizing, and again, we don't have enough of that, especially towards like queer, trans folks, Black, Latino, like non-white cis folks, and we need to be able to not just bringing them to the space to be like the token, be doing not only the physical but the emotional labor, and for what. You know what I mean? For the organization to look good, for the space to all of a sudden seem like something that it's not. And it doesn't solve the problem. And again, it goes back to what we say, it creates more harm, right? And I hope Overso also want to jump on tackling this question. It's a great question.
It is a great question. And I think just as a very simple matter of practice, whether you're working for an organization or you are approaching someone for partnership in, human to human, I think it's always good to start with the question of like, what do you need and what do you want for this process, right? Because and I always try to encourage. It's so funny. We're doing this, more and more in my like work, and I find that sometimes artists don't, in my experience, don't always even know how to answer the question because they're not used to being asked by an institution what expansively they might want beyond like, I'm going to need some lights and mics and someone to run like the tech for me, right? And so I always offer lots of suggestions, like, will you need childcare support during this process? Is food going to be a challenge during this? Do you have other things that you can't do because you're taking this opportunity with us that we should factor into how we care for and support you in this process? And then I always encourage folks to like move beyond the transactional, which doesn't just mean eliminate the transactional, because what you pay someone for their labor is a critical part of that partnership. Again, whether you're working as an institution or as a person. So like make sure that the transactional part is equitable, but then move beyond it. And again, regardless of whether, like, I don't think you have to be working for a big organization to ask people like, how can I serve you deeply beyond like the one deliverable that we're working on together? So like we're working on creating this, like we're working on doing a protest together, or we're working on creating this art experience together, whatever it is. But like, what else are you as a human like working on, and what things do I know or have access to that I can share as we are, in partnership? So like, I'm going to spend 3 months working with you on this one thing, but I know people who do, so many other things in the world. And I also have skills beyond the skills that I do for you as a producer. And so how can I be in deeper relationship with you? I have a very strong bias that I'm not afraid to admit publicly, which is I care more about depth than breadth. So I care more about the depth and like the sustainability and the health of a relationship than I care about having lots of them. or the status of them, like how big and fancy those relationships are. So that was what was coming up for me.
I think, Hope, I love that you said that. I think was really important. One of the many things is that how when you ask sometimes the artist, well, what can I do for you? What do you need? And how folks sometimes they don't know what to say because they're not even used to that question. So they're like, it's almost like it's like paralyzing. They're like, well, I don't know. I didn't know that was a possibility. That you could be seeing me as a human being, as somebody that does have other needs that it doesn't seem apparent, like childcare. And I will say, as a single parent, like I'm always talking about, like I'm always the one for childcare. So whenever I hear that, I'm like, thank you, because it's part of that care. It's part of the way, and to be able to have those resources, and that we might not imagine because they're outside of our reality, it allows for the work to actually happen in the way that it needs to happen. You're actually caring for those individuals that produce the work because you valued them, you valued their life, and then you're trying to honor also like everything they might need, and you recognize, and that's super important. Versto, I don't know if you want to also tackle a little bit of the question, but if you don't, we can just move into the next one. I'm keeping it very organic because it's also Sunday.
Yeah, it's a lot. And shout out to Silly Net. I personally know her. She's a phenomenal artist in general. Mm-hmm. Shout out to Silly Net. I like the need and the wants. I think that's an important question. And I think it kind of goes back to people not being able to accept a compliment. You notice, like, if you bash, like I do with my students, I do rap battles with them, right? But with the rap battle, I have them do compliments. So it's a compliment battle. And I tell you, almost every time I do it, students struggle with this. And the simple lesson is, why is it so hard to be nice to somebody? It's so easy to tear down. Right? It's so easy to be mean. Why is it so hard to love and care? So back to the want and the need is a very important question. And the resources are extremely important that are needed. So, like as a queer Black woman, yeah, I'd love to get paid more for what I do. Just saying, or even have some care. Maybe give me a hug, or just, again, have this. Again, I'm going back to space. I can't stress that enough. We need the space and the opportunity so hopefully somebody out there, some organizations can create that. We have some of it. We just need some more. And this goes back to, the past 3 years, I didn't realize how important self-care is. Self-work is. This all falls under the self-care, self-love, self-work category, within yourself as a person. You, okay? So it's like you got to be a little selfish too. You got to heal. A lot of us going through childhood trauma, that's deep, and generational trauma that we have to try to stop. It's got us because it just keeps going. It doesn't end. And children, you watch kids, they're taught. It's education. You can't escape education. Even if you didn't want to go to college, even if you had a job, you still have to get trained for the position, right? That's education, or if you have a trade, you still got to learn. So you can't escape education. So we need just more education out there for sure, and resources for sure. So thank you.
I love that. No, I love that we keep returning to education, care, spaces. I mean, I see that we keep returning to certain things, and which I feel that it's kind of like the foundation of like, how this work exists, but also the way it can exist in a way that it diminishes the amount of harm, because I think the harm is always happening in ways that we may not anticipate. So I want to put some questions. We have 2 more questions in here. We have another one from Zulina. Actually, I think there's 2 in there. So I love this. What do you think queer women creators need in order to have better partnerships with larger institutions? There is a distrust there. However, there is a reciprocal relationship there that can potentially be healthier and more fruitful. What would give us a feeling of safety when organizing collaboration with organizations and opening up our art to helpful critique, growth, and etc.? So that's one of the questions, and I love it because I think better partnerships, I think, is really important with large institutions, because often large institutions might not be equipped to care for individuals, and then that's part of institutional racism, which it happens. But anybody wants to jump in on that as well, or just tackle part of the question even? Thanks, Lynette, again for another great question.
It's a great question. It's one of those things where it's tough because you got to answer on the spot. You almost have to think.
Right.
Trying to think before I can even. What a
right. No, and you're right, and it's what gives a feeling of safety when working collaboration. I will say one thing I took from my experience. I feel transparency is really important. I think we need more transparency. I don't think we have enough in collaborations and partnerships. I think that's how some of the gaslighting can happen. So I think transparency might be a great thing.
I think about these questions constantly, and I'm curious to hear from people who don't necessarily represent an institution for most of their day. But I will say, I'm not afraid of and Longworth has produced Lynette's work twice now.
Mm-hmm.
And I am not afraid of the artist who comes in and has demands or big
Mm-hmm.
questions. I'm not afraid of that. And so I don't feel confident that I am the right person to answer these questions as a woman creator who's often actually in the seat of privilege, the seat of power or safety in these conversations. But I would love for more artists, particularly queer women creators, to feel comfortable saying, what's the budget for this? And how are you prepared to serve me and support my work? And what is your plan for ensuring that the community hears about this work? The community I serve hears about this work. How will you make sure that this work is accessible for me? Or not for me, but for my community and for the folks I'm trying to have this art speak to. And I hope that institutions will be very comfortable answering all of those questions and being transparent, to your point, Luciana, about all of those things. But I'd love to hear from people who don't sit in my situation.
Yeah, I find that a hard question to answer because, to be honest, I usually just try to avoid large institutions. But I understand that I'm young and kind of a child, so probably as I grow older, that will become impossible to actually avoid large institutions if I want to be an artist, if I want to make that my career. But I feel almost most times when I enter into a situation with a large institution, and I mean defining a large institution is hard, but usually one of those things that Hope was saying, whatever it is on that list, one of those things is not going to be available, whether it's you're not going to get paid, it's not going to be accessible to your community, they're not willing to support you as a person, whatever it is. Because I really, really hate when I have worked with several organizations or whatever where the way that it ends up is they use my work, they pay me or whatever they do, and then it ends up that the audience that they're showing it to is all white people or all men or all straight people. I'm well, that's not really what I wanted or what I needed, because my work is for Black women and for queer people and for whatever, so it's this work wasn't made for them, but you have now taken it and given it to this audience that it wasn't really intended for anyway. So it's well, that just makes me feel kind of weird and be well, I guess so, fine. But also that was never my real intention. So I feel once you start making demands, especially as a Black queer woman, as a Black woman, period, once you start making demands, people are very easy to kind of just be okay, never mind, we'll find somebody else who's easier to deal with, because they're so used to being able to manipulate Black women because we get so few opportunities. So when you start making demands, it can be very easy for them to just back away from you. So that's kind of why I just try to avoid that situation altogether, because I know that my demands won't be met, and I'm made to feel I have a lot more my standards are too high or whatever it is, when I know as a person, it's okay to have standards, and you should have standards, and you should have things that you want, but constantly being told okay, that's too much, you can't have all that, is very discouraging. So it's better for me personally to just work with other people who are like me, or to work with like smaller orgs where I can have like one person that I'm in communication with or whatever it is. And like that just makes me feel more secure. So if more big organizations and more big institutions were willing to do that and like kind of meet your demands as they come, I think that I would be much more comfortable in that situation and definitely have a better relationship with them.
All right. I love that you're bringing safety, but also like the audience, who does your work going towards, like who's experiencing it? And I find that conversation happens a lot with some of my friends who are like, Black curators and historians. And sometimes they say, who am I doing this work for? And they decide that they want to do it for their community, for folks like them. They're growing up in similar situations. They're dealing with similar struggles, and that's a way of healing their community. And going towards like, the care praxis, of doing work for, the folks that need the most, which they recognize themselves in it. Thank you, Siobhan. First off, and then we have one more question.
The demands, yeah, I think it's important to make sure that there's an alignment. So I don't want to work with a larger institution if I know that. For example, Chick-fil-A is closed today, but I don't support Chick-fil-A because they don't like gay marriage. So Chick-fil-A better not be reaching out to Versatile Poetiq to work with them. And it's okay. Not everything's going to align. Okay. So as long as it aligns, I think that helps at least. The transparency is very important. And again, the communication, but I can see why working with a smaller organization can maybe you can feel a little bit more comfortable because it's smaller and more interpersonal. The larger institution, that's a big, you're not, I like personal relationships, if that makes sense. And then working with larger institutions, got to be careful because there's that thing called capitalism, that we all, say some people are proud capitalists, you know what I mean? No one should be hungry in America, people. Okay, resources again. So it all depends. But as long as it aligns, and I think that helps me feel safe, and I can have that demand, and my demands met, then I'd be willing to work with anybody. Let me put it that way. And that's because that's a loaded question. Great question, though, Zuli. Thank you.
I know we have all big heart Zulina right now. These amazing questions.
Yeah, a reflection on that.
Right. And we have one more question from Nathan Lewis. How long did it take for each of you to find the community where you feel valued, if you have, and what differences has it made in your life? That's a great question too. We're getting some good questions here. I like these. People are getting deep. They're not like afraid to be like, let's get, it's like what is it? We hope you said the gray, the messiness. It's like, I like that. Who wants to tackle that question first? I think we all should answer the question.
I can go first. First of all, hi, Nathan. We love Nathan. He helped me get into college, so we like that. I would say like this summer, I feel like I very much that value is me and like several friends, we started our own organization because, it, like we were just talking about, it can be very hard to find an organization that's like, it aligns, like Versatile said, with what you believe in. So we started our own organization called Connecticut Against Brutality, which is basically just a bunch of young Black women and queer people just like, fighting for racial justice in our community, sort of in the New Haven area. So we put on like probably 15 protests over the course of the summer and like several events. We got to do a Black Art Matters event with Art Space New Haven, where we were able to like curate a bunch of different Black artists to show and have them sell their prints, and then like had a bunch of Black performers and we were able to pay them, and then, do partnerships with a bunch of different like Black owned businesses in the area. And that was really special. And I felt like on that day, especially, we were able to really bring together a community that cared about Black artists and Black people enough to actually support their work and to actually come and like listen to what they had to say and support their businesses, support their art, and like make sure that everybody got paid, everybody was taken care of, everybody had food, all this stuff. Like that was really special to see like that community actually happening and actually taking place. And like, it can be very hard to bring a community community together to do that. So it's very cool to get to work with other people who are like me, because so often you find yourself in organizing situations where it's like you have a bunch of people who really want to do good, or like, you know, you're in a situation where you're trying to organize for Black Lives Matter, say, and it's like all white people who want to do good things, but, you know, obviously everybody's struggling with their own wherever they are in the journey. But it's really cool to be able to just work with other Black women and other Black queer people to just do what we have to do because we're all on the same page. And like that definitely makes me feel more valued, because I know that that's a group of people that I will never have to explain myself to, and that's a group of people that I will never have to convince of my humanity or convince of why I deserve what I feel that I deserve. So I would say to anybody who feels like they haven't found their community, like, just seek out people who are like you and seek out people who truly value you and what you can do and what your talents are.
Thank you, Siobhan. Hope or Reverses Hope?
Open mic changed my life. Probably it was 12 years ago, and that's funny. Sully Net was at that open mic, literally an open mic. I'm from Avon and Simsbury, so I was at an open mic called the Russell. Then a old college classmate told me to go to this other open mic on a Wednesday, and I went. And the host, he became my mentor. The DJ's one of my best friends. It pushed me into the whole community. We put it that way, like legit. There's in simplest forms into hosting and into my mentor got me into teaching spoken word. So I also am a member of Comores Cultural Corner, and funny, Comores Cultural Corner will be on it from 3 to 4. Comore Harrington is going to be moderating a panel discussion. We went on a 10-day Black Art Heals tour from November 15th to November 25th. We went to Norfolk, Virginia, Virginia Beach, Charleston, South Carolina, New Orleans, Atlanta, Baltimore, and Philadelphia, and Montgomery, Alabama. Okay. So yeah, we're really pushing the Black Art Heals because Black art does heal. It's very important. So yeah, based upon being a part of the KCC, being just a part of the art scene, again, for the past over 12 years, I certainly feel valued. So how long it took going to one open mic. And I encourage people, whatever you want to be a part of, again, seek it. Seek those people. Again, we have phones, we got the internet, research, find out what's going on, and just go. Just all you have to do is be in space. Because, you know, some people are like afraid to like perform at an open mic. They always say, it's okay. I always tell students, just go to the open mic and sit and listen. Because being in the space, you'll meet people and probably will be encouraged, especially if you see somebody else do it. It's like people are like natural followers, not necessarily natural leaders. You know, so when you see somebody doing something, it kind of gives you an idea. That's why you have spin-offs of everything, you know, because you're seeing we started Black Lives Matter, and then these lovely individuals started saying Blue Lives Matter. But you see, but they only started saying that because people said Black Lives Matter first. People are followers. So be in the space. Yeah, and I certainly feel valued. Sometimes I don't feel valued when, and Miss Sulinet can relate, there was a tour going on, okay? And I don't want to bash this tour, so I'm not going to name the tour. But there was a tour going on as a fundraiser, right? And the individual made sure that all the musicians and rappers were going after, like, me and Sulinet. Like, so me and Sulinet, like, we weren't valued as poets. You see what I'm saying? It's like, oh, it's just poetry. So we got to go at the beginning of the show. It's kind of like if you see anyone performing, you know, like the headliners at the end of the show. So we were like, you know, the local artists with the one hit on the come up, you know, and so that's where I certainly didn't feel valued. That sometimes people don't value poetry per se, you know. But overall, I do love my community, and shout out to everybody in it, and shout out to all of you.
Thank you, Versa. That was beautiful. I love, like, I think this is a great, like, also last question too. Hope, you want to tackle it too?
I think it depends on which community we're talking about, because I think I found different communities at different points in my life. I did not grow up in a place where it was safe to be queer, so finding that community has taken quite a long time. But I would say and this is not because I'm here on this panel and I'm here doing this job right now, but I genuinely don't believe I felt so much a part of a community until maybe like 6 months after I moved to New Haven, and I'm still new. I moved in the fall of 2019. I feel more part of New Haven than I have ever felt in any place I've ever lived, in terms of like the neighbors as community. I have found theater community fairly early in my life. I found femme community, it's somewhere in my early adult, 20s. But finding like what it means to be in a city, in a community, to know neighbors, to know people who are leading the organizations that I'm a part of, has been very recent. And I think that it's like I don't even know how to find that, because I feel like it happened to me. I was active here. I was like a person who cared and showed up for things, but like what it looks like to me to feel valued by the community of New Haven means being like invited to serve. That always makes me feel good. That makes me feel like it's just like I like to help people. It's probably why I'm a producer. So being asked to be a part of things and being known is like really lovely and warm, and to be seen for like all of the parts of me, not just being seen as a producer and being invited because I'm a producer at a theater here. Like, feels really lovely.
Thank you, Hope. We're fortunately getting at the end of our talk. I wish we could have this talk. Like, I think all of you have expressed this sentiment like all the time. I want to be like, just keep going with this conversation. And to me, it is almost like this feels like community right now. It's like, this is like and that to me is it's so precious. It's so precious. And like many of you, like, I don't think I've had community until moving to New Haven. I never even knew New Haven existed also, or Connecticut. So for me, it's like, now this is home, but, and it feels to me is also, like you said, Hope, it also feels safe to be, a queer woman, like a queer Latina woman for me, and a single mother, and me checking all these boxes. It's good to feel held and be seen, and it's such a rarity. And I am incredibly humbled to have the opportunity to moderate, 3 inspiring, creative, queer women in conversation, and navigate the messy areas, and learn as well. So I thank all of you for sure. And I think everybody that, has asked questions and has been watching us today. And I don't know if there's anything else anybody want to say. I think Patrick is going to be jumping in any moment to kind of do some closing remarks. But I don't know if anybody wants to say any projects you're doing right now. You want to like just do it, say something that, maybe your website, your IG handler, anything that you want to say, there's a chance before Patrick. And I think he should be here any moment.
I just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it. Definitely learned something. Versatile Poetiq. My name's in the corner. That's my name on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Please follow me. I'm teaching. That's the only thing I have going on right now. Hold up. I do have something. April 1st, I'm hosting Kimura's Culture Corner. We have teamed up with Power Up from Manchester, and we're doing a youth open mic. It'll be on Zoom. So when the flyer comes out, if you follow me, I always post and promote. You can check that out. Thank you very much. And go learn something, people. Go learn something. That's my advice. And love yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy and Miranda and Patrick. It was great and like so much fun. And like thanks to the prize winner. I love the prize winner. And my Instagram is Scrap Ghost. You can follow me there for my weird visual art and collages. I don't really have anything going on, but like, hey, DM me if you want to talk. I'm always here to talk about, women's issues, Black issues, queer issues, or art, or whatever you want to talk about. And yeah, definitely open a book, educate yourself, continue the conversation. Don't let it end here. So yeah, happy International Women's Day, everybody.
I don't have anything public facing coming up, but you can always, like Siobhan said, you can pay me. You can pay me to teach things, to facilitate things, to consult on things. I'm here for that. But right now, don't give me dollars. Right now, give these folks dollars. Give the Pride Center dollars. Yeah, I'm taken care of for now.
Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Lucy. Yay, Lucy, for being an amazing moderator today and being an amazing board member of the Pride Center. Thank you, Lucy. Before I go, is there anything you're doing, Lucy?
Oh, yeah. So we have our opening of our, our upcoming exhibition. It's a virtual exhibition. It's called Silent Fire. It goes live on March 15th at 7 p.m. And you can register at our website, nastywomenct.org/events. But we'll also be live streaming into Facebook. And the exhibition will be up until August, and it's a collaboration with the Institute of Sacred Music. It's we're looking at voices of women, like classical composers, and stories that haven't been heard, and we're merging. They go from the 1600 all the way to present time, and they're in response with contemporary artists. They're listening to these pieces, and they're creating works of art to respond to those classical pieces. So it should be fun. It's our first time doing creating a virtual gallery. So hopefully it will be okay.
It's going to be amazing. Nasty Women is always one of my favorite artistic experiences I have every year. So I know it will be amazing.
Thank you, Patrick, and the Pride Center, because, again, going back to community, I am grateful that thanks to the New Haven Pride Center and to Patrick, we continue to learn and what it means to be intersectional feminists. So thank you.
I'm continuing to learn. I'm continuing to learn. I just got a new book from People Get Ready. So I am glad to continue to keep reading and learning, and I appreciate all of you. So I'm going to do the last wrap up. Miranda, unfortunately, their internet gave out at the last second. So here I am. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today for our Day of Action. This was our second program of today, but we have much, much more coming to you. So be sure to take a short break and then come back and join us for Queer Women Organize at 2 p.m. And as Versta already said, that does include our fabulous friends at Kimura's Cultural Corner, but some other incredible queer organizers from around our state. And then we're going to be doing a coffee hour with Miranda later this afternoon at 3:30. Great space to have a chat about LGBTQ women organizing and what the center can do to be better participants in these spaces, and how we can be better activists for our queer female, queer women, and queer non-binary communities. And then finally, we're going to have a night of action with Planned Parenthood votes, and that's at 6 p.m. Also, you can make sure you check out, as Lucy already said, the opening of Nasty Women Connecticut on March 15th. We're going to be sharing it on our Facebook, so you can go to our Facebook, but go give a like to Nasty Women Connecticut, because there's some good stuff going on there. Remember, we, the center, are here for you year-round, always, with dynamic programming, social services, support services, case management, and more. You can learn about everything that you can engage with at the center at newhavenpridecenter.org. Also, make sure you check out all of our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can subscribe and follow us and like us and all the other things that you can do in the various social media worlds. And finally, I would love for you all to consider joining as a member of the center. It is completely free, and you get access to really cool behind the scenes things. You get to know first about everything. And one last thing, if you enjoyed yourself today, if you want to support the work of the Pride Center, consider making a donation. A donation of $5 or more can have a huge impact on the work that we do. And we so appreciate everyone who gives their time, their energy. And again, one last time, I just want to say thank you to these incredible people who I had the joy of sharing space with for the last hour. I was backstage, but I was still sharing space. And all of you, anytime you're on any of our panels, it's just amazing. I continue to learn. I continue to be better human, and I appreciate all of you. So thank you, everyone, and hopefully you will continue to join us today.